Good afternoon, good evening, bonjour, bonsoir, dobaha ke namaste, sham ke namaste. I'm coming from Melbourne, Australia tonight. My name is Esther Charlesworth and I'm a professor in architecture where I run the Master of Disaster Design and Development degree and the founding director of Architects Without Frontiers. So tonight, I'm really happy to introduce, we have the second INHAF webinar along the same broad theme of the one we had last night, humanitarian architecture and why is it relevant in a post-COVID world. But tonight, led by Sandra, we have this webinar specifically on the focus on shelter protection and gender. And through 6 stories of female architects designing for women and children, we will hear the narratives and journeys of architects Ella, Forhat, Saija, Michèle, Ramona, and Chiara, and Sandra, through their work, as Sandra has written, to improve the quality of life and well-being of marginalised women globally. And these 5 or 6 architects are really part of a growing network of shelter women to exchange and inspire each other to make the broader disaster and development and humanitarian sector change and shift. And I was just amazed in doing a little research prior to this session on the fundamental lack of evidence-based research on this critical theme, on shelter, protection and gender. There's a lot obviously on protection, there's a lot on protection and gender, but put the 3 words together and it was quite a shock to me how little is out there. So I think without shelter, without women, without protection, how can civil society globally ever rebuild itself after poverty, after pandemics, fires or floods, etc., etc. But I'd like to hand over now to my colleague and chair of this event, Sandra Durso, who I mentioned last night in the webinar. We met about 25 years ago on the start of our journeys into this sector. So over to you, Sandra, and thank you all so much for giving us your time and your stories.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you to our dear audience. Thank you, good afternoon, good evening as well. And thank you from wherever you're connecting these days, if you're comfortably sitting at home or in an office or a home office these days, or that you're just listening in maybe on a public transport with your masks on and your earsets on, or students between 2 courses and still attending this webinar. We appreciate, because given the demands, choosing this webinar among the many duties that you have is already fabulous. Welcome, a heartfelt welcome, and thank you so much. This webinar could not have been conducted if not for the great collaboration with INHAF, India Habitat Forum, and RMIT, Esther and her network. And I think, first of all, let me spend a couple of words, because we just suggested this webinar as part of this incredible series called Rethinking Cities, which I came to know a bit back, a few months back. I think it has been the intuition of Kirti Shah, who is with us today, who's a bit the mastermind behind this series. I think his intuition and a bit his visionary idea that definitely we would be stuck for months in front of our screens. So maybe our social interaction would have been diminished, but certainly not the ability to grow in connections and in networks these months. So INHAF, after this intuition, has called 200 specialists together, over 200, and running 60 webinars. To date, this one is the number 46, I guess, but 60 webinars, 60, on unpacking urban issues from the multiple angles that it can happen to be, and the complexity of talking about slums, talking about the urban poor, talking about citizen initiatives. So not just among the experts and the specialists, but combining combining the networks, academia, research, practitioners, grassroots, all together in trying to change mindsets by creating more society dialogue around these topics and in the wake of this pandemic. So thank you, INHAF, for offering us the opportunity to talk about, yes, shelter, protection, gender, these are themes that are, for me, very more at the heart of my being humanitarian architect and working with the Red Cross now. And it's my pleasure and honor to have today invited those who I believe are some of the most talented, inspiring professionals, women professionals that I have met. Some of you I have met, as we know, indeed, it doesn't make us younger, but more than 20 years back. Long established friendships. Other of you are more newer discoveries for me, because of course, as soon as you travel, even just in front of a screen, you come to discover so many ambitious, talented young women that are growing into the new career path. So the aim of today's webinar is twofold, I would say. So the first one is really to showcase with, powerful, visual, inspiring talks, the projects and the processes behind those projects that have come to protect, empower, promote dignity, or improve safety of women and children in different countries. Why is it so important? I think, just not just the pandemic, I think those incredible challenges that any single woman faces in a substandard house built in the outskirts of Beirut, or tackling with floods in Asia these days and trying still to send their kids to school, or women that are trapped in the fire outbreak in Cox's Bazar just a couple of days back, on migration routes in South America. There is incredible hardship and incredible new trends around also discrimination, violence. And even for us who are all architects and planners, the fact that even home has two connotations. Home can still be considered as a luxury for the many that don't have a home anymore, or that don't have access at home to the many services that we may have as being basic, but homes becoming also the most uncertain place, or places where violence is exacerbated. So that's aspects that we'll have to deal with as well. So those aspects of participation, legal protection, physical space improvement, or co-design are just angles that we're going to see with our panelists. The second component I'd like to share, second aim is really not just to exchange, it is to inspire each other, to connect, and as Esther said, to grow a network, which is in the making, but I think it has a huge potential to expand these months and years. And that's about women dedicating their efforts to alleviating other women's suffering and create new pathways as well in the career journey. It is about trying to change the narrative around the gender disparity in the sector as well. It's still not a career path that is mainstreamed at all, but we know that more than ever now, it is important to put, all energy and opportunities to have a more activist approach among women, among mothers, among practitioners, among architects and designers ourselves. So the panel today, without further ado, has not just outstanding architects and built environment professionals. I've tried to combine an insight that comes from women on the first panel, maybe colleagues and friends that have been looking and working around humanitarian shelter, community infrastructure, housing, especially for women and in different countries, we'll see. And the second panel, so the first three will be talking more about women's spaces, and the second panel will be talking more around co-designing child-friendly spaces, and they will see in urban or non-urban environments, tackling as well climate change and the need to address climate change and humanitarian or education in the wake of changing climate. And then these 6 stories, I hope that they're balanced between continents. We will talk from Lebanon to East Africa, from West Africa to Bangladesh, take us all the way to Cambodia. And I hope that somehow we're balancing also the kind of more seasoned generations such as mine with new generation and talents to the field of humanitarian architecture. And yeah, last but not least, I think, I mean, we have multiple backgrounds. 3 come from the north, another 3 have Middle East or Asian origins. And I really am grateful to all of you to make space today, not just because you have been tackling these days as well, grappling with outbreaks of fire in in Bangladesh, and you're still sitting with us today. Others have a bit of fevery states and had to go for COVID tests. So thank you so much for being here, even with your work and different tasks. We can use the function of Q&A in the, you will see as the Zoom function allows. So please do put questions and answers like yesterday session in the box. We will hope to answer a few of them at least at the end. We will maybe not run to the full 2 hours today, but we will definitely make most use also of trying to get exchange with the audience. So without further ado, I think we will be starting with the first panel, and I will introduce the panelists one by one as I'll give them the floor. You will all have 10, oh, it was 10 Swiss minutes, but as I'm Italian and added another 2 minutes because we're never so much on time, but 12 minutes each might be absolutely the time slots so that everyone can have time to go through it. And I would like to ask you basically 2 questions. The first question is about journeys. As we said, it is about stories, hearing your story. What has motivated you to embark in this journey as professionals dedicated to mostly humanitarian challenges or developmental challenges? And what is an example of your work that you'd like to share because you think that it has made an impact in life of women or children in the places where you've worked? So I'd like to present, first of all, the first speaker on the first panel, who is Saija Hollmenn. Saija, good morning. It's still morning for us, France, Finland. Saija is a professor of practice in humanitarian architecture, and she is the Vice Dean of Art and Creative Practices in the Aalto University, Helsinki, Faculty of Architecture. And I think her work is really driven by community development, the idea of energy, localization, local skill sets. And she is at the verge of that magic combination, I would say, between academic work, research. She co-started a lab called the Aalto World in Transition Research Lab, and also having her own practice, but having own architectural practice and starting an NGO called Ukumbi, which I found in Swahili is public meeting space. I like this Ukumbi word. And doing providing architectural services for community needs, specifically in Africa. So I think that's where I saw her work. Small anecdote, 20 plus years back, I was working in Senegal on a dance school, and it struck me because I ran into one of her first projects probably, and it was a women's center. Well-crafted, locally appropriate, meaningful, and to me it was somehow a bell that we just needed more of these spaces. So without further ado, I think I'll hand over the word to you, Saija, and from now on you would have 12 minutes to go through both these questions: what brought you here, and what is the impactful work that you'd like to show us. Over to you.
Thank you, Sandra. Let me share my screen. I go with a full screen and then can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you. So first of all, I'd like to thank all of you who are organizing this wonderful event for being invited. It's an incredible privilege and an honor to be talking to and with you today. So I'm totally excited. Seeing some familiar faces and new ones as well. Because we have these 12 minutes, right? So what on earth brought us on this journey? It is all about collaboration. It is all about working together. And in my case, the most closest collaborators have been my dear colleagues and friends, Jenny Reuter and Helena Sandman. We actually went to Senegal to design and build the first project of ours that Sandra was referring to, a women's center in Rufisque, as students of architecture. It was a course in the then Helsinki University of Technology Department of Architecture that took us there to learn something about local culture and basically to get completely confused, have a cultural shock, and try and understand a little bit of the realities, lived realities of people who live in totally different cultures and societal situations than we do. And that was the beginning of my journey. That first field trip happened in, 25 years ago. And along the way, we established what Sandra was already referring to, our NGO called Ukumbi, which aims at providing architectural services for communities in need. So the first project, as said, in Senegal, was originally a student project. And it all got started, of course, because we had professors who have this profound understanding and experience in working in international development context, architects who felt it was important to expose architectural students to different cultures outside Europe. This project was highly collaborative. We worked with local women groups. We did our studies, the background studies and homework rather carefully, studying the picture in the right is a Wolof house in the countryside of Senegal. And the women we worked with in the city of Rufisque, who lived in the outskirts of the city, had mainly come from the countryside and were grouping together to support each other. So this women group, which grew to become very in big numbers, they wouldn't have spaces to gather. So there was nothing new in the concept of a women's center in this context. But what was new was that we, as enthusiastic architects from outside, tried to look the local ways of using space, local spatial hierarchies, not so much of the language of architecture, rather than what's behind it. How do people conceive space? And we saw this pattern that we can see in this picture, that there's a very clear line between public and private, and there's a central courtyard, you have these buildings, you have this certain pattern of backyards, etc. So trying to accommodate that sort of way of functions, adapting them to the building, which was to be in this rather informal settlement in the outskirts of Rufisque, and trying to accommodate our learnings into the modern language of architecture. We use quite a bit recycled materials. All the workers, constructors, all the materials came from local sources. So it had an educational function to it itself, that the construction itself was an educational process for the community. Not only the women had been in an integral part of the design process, but their husbands and sons were the ones building it. And we tried to provide an example of recycled materials, which was at the time not maybe a novelty, or in that context done quite a bit, but not because it was seen ecological, rather than a necessity and a sign of poverty. And we try to use that as something extraordinary, something that would appear aesthetically pleasing, because a Senegalese woman carries herself with such dignity and pride that this was to be their jewel. They were really proud because they had been part of it all together from the very beginning of the process. What the women then, when it was completed, it was quite soon, quite fully sort of embraced by the community. They what they do, that it's still very much in the use of the same women groups that we designed it with. They're producing local cereals, doing a little bit restoration, restaurant functions, daycare. That was something we didn't think was necessary, but obviously we were we were naive. Sewing classes for young girls, and as I said, the community really took over. The ownership grew as the process went on. It took 5 years altogether to complete the building, and in the end, the best reward we got was that in this opening ceremony there was a lot of speeches, etc. And yes, we were able to accomplish this, and our boys built this, and our husbands were here and there, and our mayor donated the site, etc. All these Finnish women just helped a little bit. We were able to do this. So rendering yourself unnecessary in the end in the process was the best reward that we got, that the community really owned the project. So along the way, we had graduated, became architects, and at the young age, it was a tiring process because we did all the fundraising ourselves, but the building and the project sort of took a life of its own. And along the years, we decided that we have to go. We didn't see much choice for ourselves rather than follow the path. We had other projects, some were realized, some were not. This one, after quite a bit years, I chose this one because this was an example that really fitted the theme. It's a shelter project, shelter for victims of domestic violence in Tanzania. It was partly funded by the Finnish Foreign Ministry, and it is a collaboration with an NGO in Kilimanjaro area called Kwieko, which is providing legal aid for people in the area. And the fact that there are so many problems of domestic violence is that the organization is hiring, was at that point hiring spaces, renting spaces for their clients, and we developed this project together. Originally on the right side, it was supposed to have, this is the shelter part, which eventually got built with the accommodation spaces, and it was to have an office spaces protecting it from the street view. But there was an international recession, and the building construction costs in Tanzania tripled in 2 years, and we were only able to build the first part of it, and still fundraising for the second. Nevertheless, it was something that really brought hope to the community. And in our case, when the situation is such that we are located in Finland, we do these on and off travels, and we can't be staying. We have our obligations here, so we can't stay in these locations for very long. So we have to choose who to work with. So super important because they can secure the continuity of the project, and they can make sure that the building stays in the use it was meant to be, and have the support for the community that it was designed for. Our recent project, which we're still working on, is a series of hostel buildings for secondary school girls in Tanzania, Iringa region. The problem there is that girls normally have to walk very long distances to school, and they become exposed to all sorts of dangers, and teenage pregnancies are quite common, and they have to drop school if they get pregnant, which is of course a problem. And the communities quite often want the girls to stay close to the schools. So building these hostels to provide the girls with safe environment, with sort of and appropriate chances for continuing their education is a key target. It's a collaboration with another NGO called Lira in Africa, who's doing the fundraising in this case, and Ukumbe and Hollmenn is providing the architecture design. It is an ongoing project. First one was designer built in Nyangoro, second one in Ambilole, and a few others coming in other villages. And this has an effect. We wanted to create, I forgot to include a plan, I see. But as you can see here, these are projects that are affecting many people, and having the kind of effect, collaborative effect. The communities are participating in the projects by providing materials. We're trying to promote sustainable ways of construction rather than using burnt bricks, using the ISSB, the interlocking stabilized soil bricks, and providing that kind of information also in the construction techniques, working with national institutions to disseminate the kind of knowledge and research further is quite important. So these kind of little projects may have long-term and wide impact in the society on a larger scale. So as Sandra also said, in my work in academia, I've established what we call the WIT Lab as an attempt to sort of bring back to education what I've learned from these journeys from my practice and through my research as well. A lot of wise words were said yesterday in the conversation, which I was able to follow afterwards. And one bit that particularly struck me, and also if I may quote Jan Egeland, the former head of OCA, that you can't, in a humanitarian situation, be that an emergency, but or some kind of devastating situation, you can't do on-the-job training. You have to be a professional. So my work, my practice, as it has not been situated in the emergency sort of side of humanitarian architecture, rather than in the long-term persistent poverty end of the line, with not so much the disaster element not being the most urgent component in these situations. So these situations are provided us with learning opportunities. And this kind of situations we're trying to make use of in our work in the academia with a bit more peaceful pace, with students to try and create an understanding of these kind of situations, that how can they become professionals in the long run, still not being able to provide career paths, as we know, but trying to work towards that bit by bit. So this was, I don't know how much time I took, but probably enough. And I'll be
there indeed.
Answer questions later. And I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Saija. That was absolutely fascinating to see and to really better understand the North-South collaboration, the avant-garde projects 20 years back on recycling materials and localizing some of those skill sets. Thank you so much. Now we've talked about spaces for women. Now we'd like to see also examples, and I will be introducing my dear colleague Ella Serdaroglu. Ella, you're there with us. I can see you. Thank you for joining. Ella is probably one of the most busy women on earth these days, also because she's not only leading the shelter team at IFRC, and together with Brett Moore, who you saw yesterday, she is also co-leading the Global Shelter Cluster, which is probably the biggest effort to coordinate all of the agencies doing shelter in the aftermath of natural disasters and try to support the governments as well in making appropriate choices. So Ella has spanned a wide range of work in the past, as from DRR to the full cycle of project management. Before joining the Red Cross in Geneva, she was working with the Netherlands Red Cross. Ella has a huge international experience. I think we must have crossed paths during the Asian tsunami, but we didn't meet at that time. We met in Geneva 10 years back, and since then you're one of the best collaborators, and we see each other on a daily basis, of course, not these days that we're far apart. Ella is joining from Holland, but she's born and raised in Turkey. So she holds, honestly, a couple of bachelor degrees, which have to do definitely with urban planning and with humanitarian work. So Ella, if you can take us now through some of the challenges that you have identified, and looking probably more at impediments, bottlenecks, legal side as well. It's not just about building the building spaces, but protection can take a number of different angles. So if you want to take us through that in 10 minutes, but also, first of all, people will like to know how you came to this journey path, and as an urban planner, so slightly different, but always working on humanitarian shelter and on planning efforts for the most unprivileged communities. Over to you, Ella.
Yes, thank you very much, Sandra, and good afternoon to everyone who's joining. And I'm very honored to be here as well. I mean, when somebody talks about your own life and asks you to talk about your journey, it's difficult to, while you're living your life, probably you don't think that it's an inspiration to anyone. It's just your life that you're trying to make the most of. So I'm not so sure if people will find my story inspiring as such, but I'm very happy to share with you how I ended up where I am, and maybe share a few of the lessons along the way for all those up-and-coming colleagues who might be listening to us today, or others who might be thinking of maybe a change in their careers, which is of course always possible as well. So my personal story, as Sandra was saying, I was trained and very much planning a future in urban planning. It was a conscious choice for me. My father is an architect, and I think from the age of 6, I wanted to be either an architect or planner, someone who studied in that wonderful faculty of architecture, building, making things. And I was, well, I studied hard to get there, and I graduated. So I was very much planning a life in along those lines. But obviously, my life is maybe a classic case of what they say, life is what happens when you're making plans. And that's also what happened with me. So I would just tell everyone to be open for things that may come your way, and grab your chance, because I'm actually very happy to have made that turn in my life. So when I was 24, I had a bachelor's and a master's in urban planning, and I had applied for a PhD and got accepted to pursue an academic career in urban design. But I needed a scholarship, so I went back to Turkey, my country, to spend 1 year trying to gain some experience and also apply for scholarships. A couple of weeks after I returned, there was a big earthquake in my country. And I thought, well, it's I better do something instead of sitting at home, because I'm sure there are things that I can do. And as it happens, I got a job with UNICEF. And in the first week of my first job, I was given an A4 and told to set up a child-friendly space, which was, I don't know if I would have trusted myself with that, but they did. They didn't have anybody else, and they thought, well, you studied planning, so you can do something with it. I was completely lost, I have to admit, because I had never heard of a child-friendly space before, and we were in the middle of a tent camp at the time. And then I thought, well, I better think about, we didn't study this, so I better get my wits together and try to make something. So as you can imagine from the story, well, I didn't stay with that camp planning path, but as you can imagine with that story, what I was very unprepared, because this was not presented or included in our formal studies as a career option. Obviously, things had changed. Anyone who will Google the earthquake in Turkey will realize that it was more than 20 years ago. And of course, luckily, things have changed also in our sector in the last 20 years. So it's, I think, not being aware of humanitarian architecture, planning, settlements work as a career option has had an effect on me. So I'm really now trying to spend a lot of time with students as much as I can, but also with colleagues who are interested in pursuing a career, because it's not always an obvious career choice for an architect or a planner or any other built environment professional. So I very much welcome colleagues like Saija, who have gone out into the world and explored the options and are bringing this experience and learning back to their academic world, trying to open up the minds of everyone, trying to encourage this collaboration and exchange. So I can say that even though I went to some really good schools, this was not part of the curriculum. So that's, I think I would have appreciated at the time to have had this perspective. Anyone who's interested in this is also very welcome to knock on my door or go to this kind of networks where we can broaden our perspective. So I also have to say that I worked 10 years, the first 10 years of my career, I worked in the field without actually connecting the dots. I never really realized that being a planner could have an effect on how I do my work. I was doing more like general humanitarian assistance and was not really capitalizing on my background as planner up until what Sandra was mentioning, up until the time that the Asian tsunami happened. And I think a lot of people in our audience will be very familiar with what happened there. And very big shelter and settlements projects were set up by a lot of the humanitarian agencies. I was involved in quite a few of them as well, also over the years, leading into other engagements. So I think all in all, I have been involved for over the course of 10 years in shelter and housing programs, especially in Sri Lanka, where also Sandra has a lot of experience, and of course, a lot of people in the audience probably as well. So what that has taught me, I think that's the aspect that Sandra was mentioning also at when she was presenting me, and it's quite ignored or maybe not prioritized as being of high importance, an aspect of protection and gender that we don't always think about when we're designing spaces. And that has to do with access to land and housing for vulnerable populations in general, but of course, specifically for women or other disadvantaged groups. So I'm talking about more the legal side of things, not just legal, cultural, and social side of protection, and housing, land, and property rights, as well as security of tenure. Why is this important when you're dealing with humanitarian situations? I mean, I don't know how many of you are engaged in the commercial work, of course, in the audience, but there is a main difference between the work of a commercial architect or a built environment professional as opposed to that of the humanitarian. When you're in the commercial work, you don't really engage with the end user. You don't really engage with, you don't really worry about who's going to have access or to live in the space, the housing, or could be the communal use, who's going to use it and how they're going to access it. There are maybe the design considerations or space or light, the physical environment is really much more important. But when you're working in the humanitarian space, that really changes. Most of the time when you look at the buildings that we are able to construct in the aftermath of a disaster, they're not engineered buildings. They're not very top of the line in terms of technology and all that, but it really revolves around the end user and how people are eligible to live in that space, how they can shape the space along their own preferences. So that's really an important difference that I think people should realize and always keep at the back of their minds. So the physical aspects of protection and well-being, obviously they're very important, and this can be provided by the physical structure, but we need to realize that when people do not have equitable access to this space, the space will not protect anyone, or it will not protect the people who need the protection most. So it could be that maybe it's not the most attractive part of working in the humanitarian shelter and settlements, but it's a huge enabling factor that will lead to a success or failure of your initiatives and projects if we fail to take this into account. So what do I mean by it? I mean, obviously, when you think about the 10,000 years of settled human life, most of our cultures, traditions, and rules and regulations that govern our lives is about access to land. Who can own land, who has access to it, who can inherit it, and how even families are constructed, clans and social structures. It all boils down to access to land and resources. So we do need to understand how in every context that we work, this access to land issue works. And when you take it to an urban context, of course, you can also just, it's not always the physical land, but it's the access to accommodation, access to housing. And I have to admit that in the mostly patriarchal cultures of our day, women and other vulnerable populations are very much disadvantaged as when we consider this access to land and shelter. So this is the situation on a normal day when we do not experience any crises, but just try to imagine how it becomes exacerbated when we have a disaster or a conflict situation where people are on the move. There is enormous discrimination, maybe towards migrant communities, and the resources are even scarcer than before. So what I'm trying to say here is, of course, that we do need to understand the context that we're working in very much. And this becomes especially important when you're working internationally, because there is no way that we can understand the social structure and the issues that govern the access to land. When you just land in a country, you get off the plane and maybe you're a very qualified architect or planner, but there's so much knowledge that we lack in order for us to address this issue properly. So I'm not saying that we all have to become experts on this, but the key is what also Saija was mentioning. The key is collaboration. We have to work with people on the ground who have this knowledge. It could be professional networks, it could be legal counselors, and of course the society together, but also anthropologists, sociologists, for us to be able to understand the full picture. I want to give you an example. Hopefully it will not be too far from your own experience, and it's actually I mean, I know that we're supposed to maybe show good examples to inspire you, but I want to inspire you by a bad example of my career that I have been involved in post-tsunami housing program in Sri Lanka, in which our questionnaires, because obviously as humanitarians we do a lot of assessments and we do a lot of questionnaires and work with families, and our questionnaire was asking the name of the head of the household, which this was an owner-driven project, so people were more or less in charge of the house that they were building. But our questionnaire, our approach was based on the head of household concept. And it was of course, the family head was the man. And yeah, we had the nice files. And at the end of the program, people were given the ownership certificates, or we handed over the houses to the head of the household, without understanding that actually in some of the ethnic groups in Sri Lanka, the house was, or the land was something that the woman brought into a marriage, and it very much secured their future, and it was intended to be passed on to the daughter. So in one turn of our hands, we had actually took the property away from the woman and just gave it to her husband, and probably completely distorted the family balances, and maybe the ability for the daughter to get married, to bring something, a dowry, into her future marriage. And I don't want to think about the kind of mistakes that we might have caused. But like I said, I have been involved in this kind of programs in Sri Lanka for 10 years, and towards the end, luckily, we have gained enough knowledge and experience, and I think Kirti is also very familiar with that, to understand how land and house and marriages work in South Asian cultures. But I'm really not proud of this example. Another example I want to give is a bit further away from you, and that's from Colombia. Sandra was mentioning earlier the migration routes in South America at the moment. Of course, you have a lot of women and children traveling through different countries, sometimes as a destination country. But this example is from Colombia, where our program was focusing on enabling women to secure rental contracts, like rental housing. So a very suitable option for an urban response, of course. However, the program was not really looking at, again, the security of tenure side of things, but more focusing on cash. However, it's not enough for someone to secure a rental accommodation by just having the cash. You need to understand the markets, you need to understand the culture. And we did realize that there were still a lot of women who were being evicted, even though they had the cash, or they were not able to secure a housing. And when we tried to understand why the program was not successful, we realized that there were some stigma associated with women-headed households accessing rental accommodation, because landlords were worried of maybe some negative coping mechanisms of these women, and they were, I mean, I'm not so sure if this was a real risk, or it was more really the impression of people. But if you didn't have a husband, then you were a prostitute. Yeah, I will wrap up. So again, this showed that in order for us to be successful for a housing program and to help these people, you really need to understand the social and cultural aspects. So just to wrap up, I would like to say that I know this may not be the most attractive part, but when you're listening to all the other presentations that are coming after me and looking at good examples of the projects that my colleagues will present, also keep this in mind, how they have addressed this aspect of legal protection and access to housing and land in order to protect women, in order to protect children. And secondly, like I said, you don't have to do it alone. You just need to know that you have to ask other people who know a lot about this, so that you don't do the mistakes that I have done and some of my other colleagues. So I will just stop there. But I also want to say that today there's a webinar on the same issue in West Africa. So I will post the details if you're still have the energy to listen to the subject. It will be very interesting.
Thank you, Ella. Thank you to take us by hand through the mistakes as well, and showing that you can get inspiration even from good and bad examples. Thank you, and we're running a bit short now. Chiara, as we are going to have you on the last of the first panel here, Chiara, Jasna, Vaccaro, I must say, for the anecdotes, we met literally amidst the rubble and the dust of the earthquake in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, while probably the two of us were trying with our hands and our best Creole knowledge to talk to, probably doing an assessment on our own and not coordinating, but as soon as we saw each other and we were both architects, both Italian, both loud, and trying to make sense of what we were doing there, we connected. And since 10 years now from the earthquake in Haiti, we have been in touch. Chiara is now the Regional Shelter and Infrastructure Coordinator with DRC. She has a function not only in the continent, but also globally. She holds a PhD, is a stunning architect, and among all, I think she is doing hands-on work in East Africa, which is absolutely fabulous, especially because it's one of the settings, Somalia, Djibouti. We see you scrolling on and on from one difficult country to another more difficult country, trying with a hands-on approach to work on low-cost technologies, to work on empowering women through technology transfer as well, and finding best solutions for humanitarian shelter. So I will not take more time. Chiara, if you can tell us what brought you here as well, and then mostly also getting us through pictures you're probably taking on the job these days. Over to you, Chiara. And you're one of the most inspiring, powerful leaders, taking us through a number of initiatives, last but not least, the one in the slums of Nairobi as well, with a child-friendly initiative we all happily contributed to. Over to you.
Thank you for the words, Sandra, and thank you. It's very flattering, and I have to say I feel really humble and honored and very intimidated by the presentations before me, the colleagues Ella and Saija. I don't know if I'm pronouncing well. Amazing presentations, amazing career. I first of all I'm gonna have like 10 minutes, and I'm gonna start up by thank you all, Sandra, first of all, for the trust she has in me, and she still has after, like she said, 11 years. What is that? Yeah. And thank you for the whole team to have me presenting here for 10 minutes. And I also have to add thank you for all those future architects, already architects that are attending this meeting, that are not only women. I was keeping one eye on the participant list, which went from 50 people to 100. And they're not only women, but also men. Some of them even colleagues. We met also in Haiti. So I say hi to those that I know. Very glad to see you on board. And so, yeah, I also want to say that, like Ella, I'm not sure if my life has to be taken as an example, but I guess, or I hope I will, all of us, we give you a reason to get inspired to continue with and foresee with this career, challenging, amazing, rewarding career that requires a lot of sacrifice as well, I have to say. But in my from my little long experience now, it's over 20 years, I could say that probably it's the fate of the universe or God that kept me for such a long time in this world, I would say. So just to give you a few words about myself, yes, I'm an architect by trade. My name is Chiara. I'm Italian, originally half Italian, half Croatian, so that gives me the little gypsy side that took me around the world. I would describe myself highly curious anyway, and focused on learning in all parts of my life, including personal and professional. In my professional life, probably also in my personal life, I looked for a challenging situation and tried to help also less fortunate people, and also how can learn from people. Like I said, like actually Ella, I'm an architect by trade, but I also have a master in emergency housing that I got through ECHO, with the training rolled out by ECHO 20 some years ago. And I actually worked only for a year in the private sector in Italy. But again, I did not, I did not find myself suitable for that kind of architecture. And it's difficult to describe, because I think your profession it's like a good dress. You need to wear that dress, and you need to feel comfortable. So you're gonna be durable and sustainable in that profession as long as you are at ease and you feel that you're doing the right thing that you were born for. It's something difficult to it's very difficult to describe, but that's how I felt. And my journey began basically when I was a younger architect, and I won scholarship. And I attended the PhD Technology, Architecture, and in Cities in Developing Countries that led me where I am right now. So I lived in, I've been great, really, I'm thankful for my life, because I managed to live in, the biggest emergencies that we had in the 20 years. I was there at the right time, probably in the right place. I don't know if that's the right time, but yes, I was in Haiti with the emergency, with the earthquake, when the earthquake struck. So I had the opportunity to provide support to in the reconstruction. I was in Asia when the tsunami struck, and I lived in many different countries and contexts. And my expertise is, I would say, is mainly in natural disaster responses. But in the past 8 years, I lived in Africa, where I'm actually calling from. I'm in Nairobi right now. I'm based in Nairobi. I've been based in Nairobi for the past 5 years, but I lived 3 years prior to that in Somalia, where I was in charge of the constructions of the Horn of Africa, the countries in the Horn of Africa. I have to confess that it's very difficult to, I'm looking at the watch, and it's already 6 minutes and I'm talking, cannot believe. So it's very difficult to compress 20 more years of life.
You're Italian and you talk indeed. Take us through the slides.
Maybe I'm gonna go through the slides.
Yes,
I'm gonna share the screen. Let me share the screen. Let me know if you can see.
It's coming up. Yes, there it is. You can put it full screen, please.
Good. All right, I'm going to really flip through the screen, the slides quickly. So I wanted to start first of all with okay, let me start like that. I want us to give you a glimpse of what it's been. I cannot see you, so I don't know if you're writing any question or anything, so I'm going to go through the slides, but I'll be available at the end if you need. I'll give you a glimpse of what has been an architect in the humanitarian career or world, I would say. So I'm going to start with a big provocative question, I would say. Is construction still a man's world? Because I have to confess, I followed yesterday's session, and there were some really interesting questions from some women, some architects colleagues. I don't like to divide women and men, to be honest, we're all the same. But there is this big question, if construction or the shelter world is still a men's world. And unfortunately, I have to say, yes, it is, because only 10% around the world, 10% of the colleagues working construction are women. And yes, the number is decreasing of men present in construction and increasing of women, more women empowered, but unfortunately it's still like that. And you would have to face also this element, this challenge in the field. What's the role of an architect woman? What does it mean? Yeah, we all know the definition. That was also a question that you had yesterday, architect, engineer. And trust me, I personally had this challenge throughout my careers. And and I can give you an example very quick. I know 8 minutes, 22 seconds, kind of stressed now by the time, but I had this disappointing, I would say, also experience in Haiti. It was more than 10 years ago, and I was in Haiti, and I wanted to work with the organization. I'm not going to name the organization. I have quite a long background with you. Just to give you, a hint, I have many years of experience with the United Nations agencies. I tried many of them, and personally, I found my comfortable dress, I would say, like I was mentioning earlier, working with the Danish Refugee Council, and I've been working for them for the past 9 years now. What was the experience? Yes, I wanted to respond. That was my maybe third emergency response, and I wanted to help and provide support to my colleagues of the previous, the former organization, as an architect in providing, emergency response and emergency shelter response. And I will never forget, and that's a personal but also professional experience. I will never forget when my former colleague told me, I am sorry, we will not reach out at you because you're an architect. We need engineers to build, the emergency response and a shelter response. And I was shocked. And I thought to myself, what do they think, that we're just painting the constructions with bright colors, or we do it, like I mentioned here, focus on the more artistic side and design of the building? We're just using fancy material. And I remember I said to myself, I'm going to get the second bachelor degree. Then because living abroad is not easy, I was not able to get the second degree, but I tailor myself in that challenge, this challenge, and I managed to rise and let people, colleagues, and them understand what is the architect, what is the role of the architect in the field, and what are we really doing. And we can talk about that later. So I'm going to skip this slide because this is more like the fundamental approach we have in the field. I don't know how many out of 100 colleagues following the presentations today are already working with NGOs or in humanitarian world, but those are the 5, I would say, principles that we are following: respect, humanitarian approach, independence and neutrality, inclusion, and honesty and transparency. And it's something that actually it's applied to our also approach in design and working with communities. The top 5 reasons I would say that you should dive you into the humanitarian architecture, and that was what actually took me to the humanitarian world. The community engagement. Why? Because you work, as my previous colleague said, you need to engage. Some of us, we have experience with clients, private sectors, but the beauty of working in humanitarian world is working with communities that really need to be engaged, need to be involved in design and construction in order to improve their everyday life. I'm not talking about just refugees, but it could be a displaced people or just people affected by other sort of disabilities as well. Why to be an architect in this world? It also gives you the chance to be innovative. So you can explore and experiment the innovation, and can use the material that you don't have in your countries and come up with new ideas and be innovative, work with the communities, merge the cultures, and come up with new designs. And we all have this opportunity, which is brilliant, and it's something that only this world can give. It looks like I'm trying to sell our careers, but it's just, I'm just sharing my enthusiasm.
You're
I know.
using your 2 extra Italian minutes now. Go.
I know. But what are the other reasons? International experience. There is nothing can be compared with the international experience. Just the exchange of know-how, social understanding, and forget about the political context. But I think it's very important with our skills to be able to merge with other culture, and skills beyond design, and renew your purpose, the original purpose. I'm gonna go on very quickly here. What I was going to, but I don't think I have time. I can share the presentation. What I was going to show you, it was very difficult to choose any a project where we specifically involved women or elders or people with disabilities, because in my career, I always been trying to do that. So I try to focus on the East African corner of the world. And what we've been doing here, I'm going to give you 2 examples in Ethiopia, both South Sudanese responses when the conflict started again in 2013. And our both projects been engaging with youth and women. Both projects we've been providing. We had to face. I chose also the South Sudanese background because also it's very difficult because of the culture to get the women involved in contributing in construction. But we managed to create on-job trainings and provide what is the basic skills with work in construction work, brick production, or carpentry, specifically in this project. Here quickly, basically men were going through the construction. These are typical construction to pools from the camp is in Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, and the refugees from South Sudan. Men were in charge of the construction. Women were in charge of, as I showed you here, of the mud wall matting using mud, and the collection of the grass, because they had to take long walks. They seem to be more obviously strong compared to women, and after very long meetings with communities, it was decided to engage women in collecting the grass, and also earning some income to use for the family, for the household. Next one, the Ugandan project, again, very important. We constructed about 100,000 transitional shelters, and strong community participation, youth, and boys and girls. And here again, you have these beautiful photos that I really love of this smiley girl that was, actually, she was the first one engaged in teaching also. They were basically trained to do the job, trained to replicate the job to the other residents of the camp. Here, very quickly, I give just like few snapshots on camps. Women, elderly women engaged. We managed to engage with elderly women, also to collect grass mat and to create thatched roof that will be sold then in the camp. And again, also women in Somalia in charge of constructing the bulls, traditional nomad shelters. You have different typology of shelters here. And then myself here, recently in Yemen, as an architect, dealing with the man that you see with the glasses and the gray hair. It's a refugee, Yemeni refugees. That is a very touching story, but I have no time to tell you. But after 2 years we went through a design of this camp on northern part of Djibouti. Yemeni refugees for over 6 years now, and we're working together in following. He's now actually supervising construction in northern part of Djibouti, and yeah, and I think that was a great experience. That's it. But so much to tell you, and I'm so sorry I don't have other 20 minutes. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Chiara. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for putting your heart and soul into it, and also some of the anecdotes you've seen. Many of the works, and as we see, works at scale of thousands of these shelters have been published in shelter projects documenting. So for people online who do want to hear more about how it has been done,
I was about to say,
lessons learned, that would be great. Okay, we will need to move on because time is flying, and I am happy to now introduce you the second, Chiara, if you can stop sharing your screen, we will be starting the second round of panelists. Now we have a new focus, which is a focus that takes us to children and youth. And I am happy to introduce Michèle Young. We haven't met him sometime, but I do recall you stepping into our food door as an architect who came from the private sector, and you'll tell us more about it, but had, you know, capitalized experience in the high-end London practices, and then wanted to engage in a new career path. And Michèle, you have come a long way since then. And you've spent a lot of time in Asia, and then basically back to London these days in the public sector. So I think you basically did the whole triangulation of private, NGO, the whole loop of public. And can you take us through some of this experience, but also some of the highlights of your work in Cambodia, really at the verge of understanding how we need to change typologies when it comes to designing for climate change, or designing in the era of climate change. So over to you, and I am really happy to have you today, Michèle. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sandra, and really lovely to see familiar faces again today, and really, as everyone said, very honoured to be part of this group of women who, yeah, it's been fascinating listening to this morning. And I also listened in yesterday as well, on playback when I got the link for the talks yesterday. It was brilliant. So thanks again for the invitation. Yeah, my journey, like everyone, is kind of full of loops and chance and sort of wrong turns here and there. But in the UK, so I'm British. I have a German mother, born in the UK, and went through the UK education system. So at 17, needed to make choices about, if I'm going to university, what am I going to study? And this slide that you're seeing here is the top left corner there is actually astronaut. For a long time was what I was focused on, because I had watched with my father the space race that was going on through the sort of late 60s, early 70s in America. And I really wanted to go into space, but my physics wasn't up to it. So looking at what other subjects I enjoyed were art, geography, maths, not so much, but I could do it, and economics. It was kind of interesting because of the globalization element of it. And my father was trying to help me because he was a frustrated architect. He was a lawyer, but had designed and built both houses that we had lived in through my childhood. And so I had a slight interest in design and what space can mean and how to use it. And he got me a little bit of work with the public sector architects that he worked with in his work. And they were great. They were doing lots of social housing. In those days, the local governments were doing more social housing, and they got me making models and little drawings, and I really enjoyed it. And I thought, well, this could be for me. So, you know, I ended up going to university, and it was very much the time of these big star architects in the UK, Norman Foster, Richard Rogers, Terry Farrell. So we were seeing all this kind of big glitzy postmodern buildings going up around the country. And I was not in London at the time. I grew up down in Devon, which is a pretty rural area, very touristy, because it's got lots of beaches and lovely sort of national parks. However, so I ended up at university studying it. It was very much 50-50 male-female at the time. And we had a very sort of traditional architectural training, I would say, very much more focused on design than anything else. I had no idea about humanitarian architecture during this time. And it was really only once I got to work and I ended up, you know, going right through this, you know, it's 5 years of training. So the degree and then the MA afterwards, and year in practice in between. In fact, it was 2 years for me because there was a huge recession that hit just when I left the first degree level. And then subsequently also after the MA, it was bad economically. So there was a delay again, and I had been traveling around the world. And it took me a very long time to enter once I had actually, you know, got my qualifications. And hence, it, you know, I ended up being a commercial architect for 16 years. And it wasn't until very late in that period that I started doing buildings like this and actually delivering them on site. You know, I can remember my early career was very much on door schedules, you know, designing toilet cores in big buildings in the City of London. So it was, you know, a kind of very gradual path. And I guess initially it was all interesting and new, but as I was getting towards the end of this 16-year period, I made it into the management team of a mid-sized practice of about 60 people, became an associate. And I was really conscious of how, when I had started in my 20s, it was about a 60-40, 60 being male, 40% female ratio in the office. As we got into our 30s, it dropped to about 70-30. And once I joined the management team, it was down. I was in the 20%, possibly less, down to 10%. So it was a really different picture from what I'd started with at university. And so, you know, I started to think about, what am I unhappy about? Because even doing these great buildings, I was really missing the interaction with people and really feeling like, you know, this is what I actually initially sparked me off, was the social housing I'd been shown by the local government team. So what am I good at? And I was just analysing, you know, I love asking questions. I like finding out about situations. I like problem solving, analysing difficulties, coming to solutions with a group of people, thinking outside of the box. These are all things that architects are almost inherently gifted with. And you can learn as you go right through your career. But I think the biggest thing for me was the fostering of partnerships and relationships throughout my career has been one of the biggest assets to carry with me forward into a new direction. And I really wanted my work to be relevant to more people than just these very rich middlemen who aren't even going to occupy the buildings that I was designing and delivering in London. So I started thinking, and it was really, I had continued traveling globally throughout my career and was going to places like Nepal, down to South America, and, you know, seeing very unstable environments geographically, and also, you know, really seeing the vulnerability of populations to a variety of threats. And I'd always been very excited by the physical geography side of my learning at school. And then the human side is, you know, how do all of these things affect each other, and how does that come together in the space that is somebody's home, or on a grander scale, strategic level, a city? How do you cope with all of this? So I was starting to realize that what I really wanted was to have more social impact in my career. And so how can I set about getting that? And really for me, it's been personal it's been a personal growth journey right the way through my career. And I ended up changing into the humanitarian sector by essentially going back to university, Oxford Brookes. They run a development and humanitarian course. And through the links that I made there, I was lucky to meet Graham Saunders, who used to be the head of IFRC prior to Ella. And that's where I met Sandra and Ella and was working with them for, I think, over the period of about 6 or 7 months in 2011. And through them, I started to change my language, change my focus, and that option to be sent out to Malaysia to understand what the Asia Pacific was handling and was having to deal with, and the difficulties and the nature of working in a humanitarian organization. It was all new and all very interesting, and definitely always corroborating that I was making the right changes, that I was getting closer to what I wanted to do. And eventually I managed to secure a job with Save the Children as their Asia Regional Shelter and Construction Advisor. And that took me all over the place. So initially I had been just within the shelter team, an emergency deployable member of the team, and went to see issues in Africa, Middle East, but eventually I spent most of my career with Save the Children in Asia, and covered the Nepal earthquakes and some typhoons, Philippines and Vanuatu in the South Pacific. So very much on the natural hazard side of things. I didn't do too much conflict, only in South Sudan when I was there briefly in 2014. So I'm going to talk a little bit more now about one of the key projects that I was involved in whilst I was a regional advisor for Save the Children. And this is an unusual project for us. It's a bit of a star project. Most of the time we do deliver, Save the Children deliver a lot of education and health infrastructure, so social infrastructure in both development and emergency environments. And this was unusual in that the way that I found out about it, it wasn't a disaster that happened and dragged me in. It was kind of more that the country reached out to me at a conference that we were having in Bangkok and said that they felt that they perhaps didn't have the right expertise in their team to carry out what they had said they would do with the World Bank, who were funding this project. And essentially, this project was about providing early childhood education for minority children who live in the center of Cambodia. There's a huge lake. It's the largest freshwater lake, fed by the Mekong and the Phnom Penh River. And these people are essentially made up of, so they're floating communities, and they're essentially made up of Vietnamese and Sham communities who have been on the water for 20, 30 years or more, but most of the Vietnamese moved there as refugees after or during the American War. So they've been there a long time, but they have the essential element to this is they have no land rights. Hence, they built their houses on water and they float. And they float in and out of the periphery of the lake according to what the water level height is. And so it's a very unique environment and context. And I'll show you some pictures here. You can see sort of the top left, you're seeing a combination of houses and shops, and everybody gets about by boat. You can see also that there are some very high level stilted buildings, which are kind of emergency shelters for when there's a storm and the water is perhaps coming over the sides of their houses and other platforms that they're living on. The essential thing to also know about the context is that, you know, it's surrounded by Laos and Vietnam and Thailand. And in Laos, China have been building dams. And so it's not just a question of climate change, but it's also a question of cross-border issues that are compounding climate change problems as well. So the water levels are getting much, much lower in dry season. And it's a combination of climate change, heat, and the dams that are stopping the water flowing into that region further on. So once I got on board with this project, I was very clear that we needed to take a reasonable amount of time to understand the context that we were dealing with here, understand what other provision there is for children. Now, they have children of older than 5 years old were already having some access to education, but there was no access to education for anyone aged 0 to 5. So this was a new concept to deliver for floating communities. So we were looking at what schools are available in the region, and these are just some examples. And what you can see is mostly timber framed buildings, and most of them lacking any kind of degree of basic safety, especially when you're looking at the age group that we were looking at, who are, some of them are going to be on their knees still crawling around, and others not. So, we were very aware that we needed to kind of to really think about the safety aspects of this. So this was the only sketch I did for this, because the rest of the design was really handed over to the local team, and I was just keeping an eye on things in the background, making sure that they had the resources and access to engineers that could help them with specifics like flotation, so marine engineers and structural engineers, because we needed to figure out exactly how we were going to do this and make this a safe building for kids. A lot of it from my side was around project management. So my 16 years in commercial practice was really coming into play in this, and I was able to capacity build the local team and being able to manage this process better. And really our key focus, where the red circle is in all of the consultation that we were having. So we had the local government education representatives alongside the community, and we were making sure that all of the iterations of the design that we were coming up with were checked with them at each stage of the process before we went through to procurement. Okay, so I'll switch through. We essentially, we ended up sort of building a classroom. We had a play area as well, which is very essential because these kids are trapped on very small structures. And when you're little, you really need to be able to run around. So we made sure that there was plenty of space for the children to run, but also that it was very safe. So we had openings that were caged in. So you had metal sort of chain link fencing that you could still see through, but any toys wouldn't get thrown out into the water. You still maintained that connection with the water for the children as well. So they were always aware of what was going on around them. And the teachers always had full view of what was happening, both in the classroom and in the play space beyond. We also had specialist treatment for all solid waste that was coming out, and sort of the toilets as well couldn't discharge into the lake to pollute. It had to basically be treated before being released, and that was all on board the floating structure. We also had another prototype which was for onshore schools, which was dealing with a 7-meter water level difference between wet season and dry season. These were the sort of community hazard mapping we took people through, and this was really to help us position the building in the right place relative to wind and water flow and all these sorts of aspects. These are the finished onshore buildings, and you can see that they've got ramps and stairs, and that boats can come up these ramps depending on the water level at the time. But these sort of solid structures are providing the same space as the floating. And then this was the finished product for the floating. And we reached 13,500 children altogether, about 6,500 girls from some of the most vulnerable communities in Cambodia. And so lastly, I'll just wrap up with this slide. So as Sandra said, I've gone full circle. I've been in commercial, humanitarian, and now Due to the pandemic, a year ago, literally on Friday, I flew back to London to be closer to family, help protect them from COVID-19. And I've now got myself some work in the urban planning department of the London Borough of Tower Hamlets, which is in the East End of London. You might know it if you've been. It has the Tower of London in it. It has the Docklands. So it's a fascinating area. And in a way, I still feel like I'm in a piece of Asia because there's a really wide-ranging ethnic minority community, which is fantastic to be a part of. So I'll finish it there. That's been my journey. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michèle. I think that I'm seeing comments as well. People are getting really inspired, and we have some people connecting from Cambodia.
Great.
So I think that might be also a way that we can, if we can inspire, we can certainly share some of these presentations. Thank you for that, taking us on the journey on designing for a fragile planet, I would call it. And I think it's the new title of Esther's book as well, because it pushes the boundaries of what we are trying to do in terms of design and typologies. Yes, it might not be replicable at scale today or tomorrow, but I think it really pushes us to think on new challenges. And thank you also for saying that we all juggle between life and work balance, because that's where we also ultimately need to make choices. Now we're coming to the last and the two last panelists, which I'm very, very excited to present, not only because they really testify of the newer generation coming on board. Ramona Abdullah, thank you for joining. You're coming from CatalyticAction, and that's where I'm saying that there are some of these initiatives that I only came to hear a couple of years back by traveling with the Red Cross. And honestly, since I found out of the work of CatalyticAction, I'm also honored to be serve on the board of trustees, not just because I found your work so inspiring on co-designing child-friendly spaces in such a difficult environment as the Middle East and as Lebanon per se. So Ramona, welcome. You're an architect by profession and researcher as well at CatalyticAction. And you have done a lot on participatory approaches in your young career journey. And also, I think you are a very strong voice and passionate voice in gender equality. You have been invited in the Girls 2020 Summit in Germany a couple of years back. And I think, yes, you're really trying to push us to look at the more feminist architecture or the more activist approach in your work. So can you take us through how you come to work with women and with children effectively, and some of your career journey? And I'm really happy to see some of the work in the making or work that has been finalized in Lebanon. Over to you, Ramona. The floor is yours.
Hello, and thank you so much, Sandra, for introducing me and for inviting us to speak at this great panel. I'm very happy to be here with you today to speak about my personal journey, and especially my journey with CatalyticAction. Well, early on in university, I started questioning what we were learning in architecture, especially how it is centered around the male body, the emphasis on architecture, and the lack of women representation and role models. And it was around this time that I became interested in human-centered design and co-founded a community-based organization that aimed at highlighting the social aspect of architecture. And it was through my activism that I met the team of CatalyticAction and started as an intern back in 2016. And the experience had a huge impact on my development as a woman in architecture. At the time, we were building a school inside of an informal tented settlement with our own hands, instead of simply supervising the site, which really changed for me the image of the architect from a person simply behind a desk or supervising the construction, a catalyst. And I was very empowered. Not only I felt that I was actually contributing to the lives of those children by building a school that they really needed, but also talking with girls who were really fascinated by us women building. And this feeling stuck with me, and I wanted to do more than drawing nice buildings. And being part of the CatalyticAction team for the past 4 years gave me the opportunity to do so, and it's still motivating me today. So CatalyticAction is a charity that works to empower vulnerable children and their communities through a participatory built interventions. we champion co-production of dignified built environments where everyone can take part in the creation of equitable, inclusive, and sustainable communities. Through this process of co-design, we build local human capacity that ensures our work has a long-lasting impact. So we work with local partners and communities to identify existing needs and apply our knowledge and expertise to propose possible design solutions. And most of our work has been focused on the Lebanese context, where we work mostly with vulnerable Lebanese and displaced communities, including Syrian refugees. Children in this context are a particularly vulnerable group. And in Lebanon, many of them live in substandard housing conditions where safe spaces are scarce, if not absent. We follow a participatory approach where children, youth, and caregivers co-design their spaces with us. And those are opportunities for the children, youth, and their parents to envision their desired spaces by expressing their own needs. One of the issues that we identified was the lack of safe recreational spaces. And since the implementation of our first playground in 2015, we aim at empowering children and engaging them in a learning experience, whether through different types of play, such as educational, imaginative, or active play, or through the use of local and repurposed material. And as one of the participants in our playgrounds, Shahad said when asked about her role, I'm here to build the playground with you, so when I go back to Syria, I can build one myself. And so we can see here how it inspires children. We developed a set of values that we follow in our work, and among which are revealing and valorizing community knowledge, culture, needs, visions, and aspirations. And that's through our participatory approach, as well as like enabling equal engagement in decision-making processes among all community members. So we engage with children, parents, teachers, municipalities, and other stakeholders. A second issue that we identified was the lack of safe recreational spaces, educational spaces. In 2016, the Jarrahiyya school was born out of the need to ameliorate the learning conditions for Syrian refugees, for Syrian children, in tented schools located in a refugee settlement. And this was the project that I started working with CatalyticAction as an intern. So the school is located in an informal tented settlement, and it used to be a tent made of wood and tarp, and it provided education to 320 children. The school is an adaptive reuse of a pavilion from the Milan Expo. It was fabricated from limited resources, and the walls and roofs of the school were insulated with locally sourced sheep's wool, which provide both thermal and sound insulation. Working with local sheep's wool enabled us to hire local women, and those women had specific knowledge on how to clean, dry, and prepare the wool for use, and they contributed a lot to the construction process, which is typically dominated by men. The inclusive approach adopted in this project was also involved transferring skills, building know-how to local laborers from Jarrahiyya community, empowering women in the settlement to be part of the construction team, as well as sourcing materials from the most vulnerable. And we're very happy that our project was recognized by the Aga Khan Award for Architecture, where it was shortlisted for the 2017 and 2019 cycle, as well as it won the Bronze Award for the Regional Lafarge Hostim Award in 2017 for the Middle East Africa. Lastly, another issue that we identified was the lack of spaces of encounter, in particular between different communities, in our case, Lebanese and Syrian. We addressed this by working on public spaces projects in specific locations of Lebanon that were affected by displacement. Streets are an important public space where different communities interact and engage in everyday lives. And this project, the Participatory Spatial Intervention, was a year-long process where we engaged with the community through the citizen scientist approach. The intervention took place all along the entrance road to the town of Barlies in Lebanon, in addition to a community shade built next to a clinic and the Médecins Sans Frontières hospital, which we see in this picture. Women and children had to wait in the sun and on the floor for their turn at the clinic, now benefit from the community public space. And the intervention provide, like this space provides play opportunities for children and a space for caregivers to wait in the shade and for the different communities to come together. Accessibility was one of the important needs addressed. The sidewalks along the main road were very high, making them inaccessible. So we incorporated access ramps along the sidewalks, allowing persons on wheelchairs, mothers using trolleys, and elderly to use the road and access it easily. The intervention converted a public space into a social place. And while the municipality, they explicitly said they wouldn't allow a project on women's rights, the intervention was led on the ground by 2 female Lebanese architects, myself and my colleague Joanna. This leadership allowed participating women to experience social relations in new ways, as they repeatedly noted to us, and created a space of freedom to design an intervention and be involved in its implementation. Last but not least, I would like to share with you 4 inclusive parks that we worked on in 2019 in different towns affected by displacement in Lebanon. For these projects, we chose existing public parks as the locations for these interventions, as those parks were already used by families and they were known by local communities. This gave an added value to the projects, as through the implementation of inclusive spaces, existing social dynamics were enhanced. Participatory design activities were conducted, engaging people from different nationalities, gender, and age groups. So we engaged with children, with youth, and also with their parents. And we also conducted the participatory activities with persons with disabilities. And that was in collaboration with a specialized local organization. And this was particularly useful to understand the specific needs and aspirations of disabled children. The inclusive parks give the opportunity to children with different abilities to engage and interact and play together in a dignified settings where all children have the opportunity to play despite their abilities. It is a place where children form new friendships, they learn, explore, and develop new skills, and where caregivers can support and engage with children in a playful and engaging environment. But at the same time, to enjoy their time, meet new people, and it is a place that brings families together. To conclude with, one of the greatest impacts I felt was how by being a woman, not just in the design field, but also on construction site, and working hand in hand with people on the field, I become a source of inspiration. And this is something we were really able to touch in our projects. And this not only motivates me to be an architect in a humanitarian setting, but also the whole process is empowering to other women who work with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ramona. This was a fascinating journey into it. And as you mentioned, I mean, no matter how the scale is of a project, it can be macro, micro. The point is how much you're interacting and how much you become an inspiration for local peer-to-peer, same generation, or even for people that look upon you as being young and being so dedicated to this cause. Thank you so much. And I would say that now we are reaching the last mile of our journey, but I would say this will take us really at the heart of what humanitarian work is also, what it means and how difficult it can be. I'm really happy that Forhat Chowdhury can make it with us today. It was a bit of a last minute suspense, just mainly because Forhat is working in probably one of the largest refugee settlements, camps, however you want to call it, because it has, Cox's Bazar is in the mind of all of us when we talk about the future of women and children in such a hardship, difficult environment, which is prone to any disaster that can happen. And the last 48 hours, Forhat, you have been responding to the massive outbreak of the fire in Cox's Bazar, burning down over 10,000 shelters, loss of life, loss of hope, probably, and working with Save the Children as design and material technology coordinator yourself. in the Rohingya response is, brings you brings you not only at the forefront of that, but we're really happy to have you today with us. So you're a Bangladeshi architect who has been working for the last years with Save the Children, but also you come from a journey experiencing what is design in the more conventional world as a woman, and having even probably some of the challenges that some of the colleagues have said, being a young woman in a male-dominated environment. You had been in the steel industry or the steel companies before, and designing in the more, in the private business before a change in your career path as well. You've done a master's in design management, the University of Dhaka, and I still think that you're juggling between work and some of your studies. And you're really at the forefront of child-friendly design and integrated, inclusive design approaches in your work. So the floor is over to you, Forhat. Take us through your journey and through the work these days, and maybe even with images that bring us right to the core of what is happening when we're talking and having webinars. As we say, life is what happens when you're having other plans. Over to you, Forhat. Thank you for joining and making it.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm already really awestruck seeing some amazing projects. So hello, everyone. And before sharing my experience of last 3 years working in humanitarian context, I'd like to tell everyone that recently a massive fire incident has been happened in the Rohingya camp. It happened on 22nd March, and 4 camps has been affected, and 1 camp is totally damaged due to the fire incident. And all the actors, all the organizations, whoever working in Cox's Bazar are working together. Everyone has come up with their stocks of NFI materials and trying to help the people. And tomorrow there will be a transit walk of shelter sector and other actors to, we are trying to mitigate as much as possible the sufferings of the people. So I hope we can work out the best within a short time. So yes, here I start. Sandra, are you gonna use the presentation? All right.
Sorry, yes, indeed, it's coming up. Ankisha, can I ask? It is.
Or I can share again. Is it okay?
As you wish. Go ahead.
I was facing a bit difficulties. That's why I requested actually.
It's in the back. Should you need the backup, it's there.
All right. Is it on?
It is on. If you can put the full screen, please.
Yeah, sure. So a little glimpse of what is happening in the camp right now. This is the partial map of the Rohingya camp. I have deducted the Teknaf part. So in Camp 8 West, the fire incident started. And that
perhaps you're still on the first slide. Huh? So if you want to put the full screen mode and then scroll through the slide that you're referring to, otherwise we won't see it. Thank you.
Is it working now?
It's still on the other mode. If you put in full screen and then activate. Yes, now it's on your second slide. Yeah.
Second slide, all right.
And you can still put full screen on the bottom right if you want.
It's just about the home button.
Yeah. So is it working?
No, not yet.
Okay.
I mean, we see it, but not in full screen. You can go through it anyhow like this if you want.
All right, okay. Yeah, I think it will be easier for me right now.
That's fine.
All right, so the yellow marked camps, the 4 camps, these are affected. And the red mark, the camp 9 is totally damaged. And here a little glimpse of the fire incident that happened on 22nd. And this is one completely damaged shelter settlement where we can see only the RCC pillars are standing and all the facades and everything has been gone as they're made out of sunglasses and bamboo. And here is the recent NFI items has been disbursed within the beneficiaries and it's ongoing now. So yes, I have started my presentation with a little bit of sad news, but This is right now happening in the camps, and I hope we will recover it as soon as possible. So about working in humanitarian context, being part of Save the Children, it was an amazing 3 years journey. And before that, I was in mainstream architecture with commercial projects. And it was a U-turn while I joined here, because everything was new for me: the context, the materials, the construction techniques, even the office. Because when I joined back in 2018, there were lots and lots of construction works were going on. And usually what we do, we take pen and paper and we prepare ourselves with the designs. But here, it's like at the morning, you start the drawings, and at the evening, you are already done with the construction work, the makeshift shelters. So yes, the situation was different, but at some point when I realized that my empathy and humility is combined with whatever I'm serving in the camps, I felt really content, and I'm really glad that I have chosen this sector and I'm still working here. So my first serious venture in Save the Children was constructing a Save the Children bamboo treatment plant. As in the camp area, we are allowed to use bamboo, wood, or sungrasses rather than any permanent construction materials. It's the order from the government. So massive part of the structures was happening with bamboo. And as these were not so much mature bamboo and they were not treated, the structures were deteriorating in a rapid way. So from the sector, it was decided that any actors can come up with the idea of bamboo treatment plan. And with my utter surprise, actually, I was given this task, but while I have literally zero experiences on how to treat bamboo or how to work with it. So my first task of constructing a bamboo treatment plant started with the research. I had to go through many books. I had to learn a lot of terms. And eventually we successfully set up a treatment plant. And the good thing is the bamboo we have produced, the treated bamboo we have produced through this treatment plant really worked well with our construction, and those structures were really long lasting rather than the non-treated bamboo. So I can say that the treatment plant and the purpose was a success. And as I've been working with Save the Children, most of the designs were children oriented. So we are using behavioral nudges to include children more into the facilities which are meant to construct it for them. And I have mostly designed learning centers, child-friendly spaces, and adolescent-friendly spaces over the year. And I am going to share my recent works with this presentation. Here's the first one. This is a learning center, which I have constructed in the camp. So the main purpose behind constructing it is, as we always have very limited time, so we have very limited time for brainstorming and coming up with new designs. So usually we take 1 or 2 days whenever this sort of project comes up, and then we have to immediately start with the BOQ and procurement process. And as these are single story structure with one activity room, our main target is here to play as much as with the facade treatment. This is what attracts the community, attracts the people, attracts the user. So it was in such a point that from a high elevation, the school can be seen. And after the construction, I remember whenever I used to visit that place, people used to come up to me and say, "Did you see the yellow school in our community? It's really nice." So this gave me the feeling of being content with my own work, because it was my very first design in the camp area dedicated for children. And yes, after that, it gave me much inspiration to do more work which can attract the community and the children as well. So, and then this is another learning center, which is in the host community. So while working with the host community, we are allowed to use permanent construction material. And behind this perforated facade in this host community, there's some reason behind it, as Cox's Bazar is a coastal area. So the air is really humid and sun is super hot during summer. And most of the places we do not have access to electricity. And usually the infrastructure remains really hot in daytime. So I tried to lighten up the facade a little bit. And the larger facade of the structure is facing east and west side. So direct heat was going through the structure. So I have installed the brick in an angular way so that light can go through, not the direct heat, and ample amount of air can pass with a proper cross ventilation. And beside this, the structure looks a little bit different than the other common structures around the community. So again, here my target was to attract community with the structure itself and give them better environment inside with the construction system. So these two basically work behind all the structures I have designed here. So this is one of the learning center, we call them LC, the schools for host community. And here's another one. This is a child-friendly space. This is also in the host community. So this is, it contains one large activity room where children learn to like painting, singing, or regular activities. And yet again, I have added the plan here. So we can see that the larger facade is facing the east and west side. So again, to cut the direct heat and still allowing to enter the daylight, this staggered wall, I have designed the staggered wall here. And there's my personal favorite elevation of the western wall of the facility. So yes, this is how try to reduce the heat and still allowing air to pass the structure and make the structure a little bit stand out within the other structures in the community. So this is one type of child-friendly space, and these were basically prototype. There were total 8 child-friendly space I have designed last year. So there were 2 types. This is prototype 1. Prototype 1 is the one where the larger facade are facing east and west, and there was another one where the larger facade was facing north and south. So this is another one, and where the larger facade faces the north and south part. And here is one elevation. The interior part of the learning center is well lit with enough cross ventilation, very proper for daytime using. And here are some little details of the structure. So we can see there's sort of a material used in the window. So I want to say that all the materials we have used here are basically locally produced. Even the window shutters have been constructed locally. And this is not glass materials. This is a very affordable plastic sheet, and it's very easy to install within the window. So the structure is not that much complicated, and it gives
30 seconds for that. We're running out of time.
Oh, okay.
Heads up.
No worries. All right. So here is another adolescent-friendly space I have designed. So here we got somehow from the adjacent land, we got a large boundary wall. And as the adolescent girls and children will come to this facility, so we thought why not painting the facade with some colorful things. So yes, we followed it. And okay, I'm skipping it as I have less time. And there are some details in the structure. So yes, I have provided some slender windows, so the room remains well lit. And there are some these are the leftover tiles at the right side of the right side photo. We can see in the floor there are some designs or patterns going on, and these are basically leftover tiles we found in our warehouse, so we used it using for some sort of patterns. And there's a recently we have been working with our DRR ventures, and we are engaging women with the DRR related works in the camp. So we covered one story from one woman beneficiary who actually participated with our DRR ventures, and it was in very first time in her life that she earned money through her work, and she was very delighted with the attempt we have done in terms of DRR works and by engaging women, not in a big scale or not in very very tough sort of work, but still it's the beginning of engaging them. I hope it will expand it in a larger perspective in future. And this one is a little personal favorite thing. I'm wrapping it up quickly. So it's part of being the construction team doesn't always mean that we have to build and construct and design structures, infrastructures or shelters. So as part of being Save the Children, in some of our facilities, the children themselves came to me and they said they wanted to paint and they wanted to decorate their facilities. So we actually conducted a 3 days art camp in the camp last year. And the most fascinating thing was due to shortage of spaces, we were limited with 20 participants inside the facility. But when the camp started, the painting session started, children started to share their pages with their friends. And we can see in the picture, that in one page, 4 children are painting and sharing their ideas over the paper. So this was a fascinating revelation last year while working with them and decorating the facilities, and one of my favorite tasks I have done in the camp.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Thank you, Forhat, so much. I have to cut you now short, but you're at the end of the presentation because we are running over time, and I am afraid otherwise that even technology will cut us short. We are at the 2 hours. I must say that I'm very pleased. I'm seeing that the chat is very active. Probably the chat is more active than the Q&A, and the Q&A will be really happy to share maybe a few works on owner-driven reconstruction, because it was mentioned. People are asking even how can you endure? I mean, how can you stay focused on your assistance in such difficult environments? But I think more the objective of this webinar was really also to make sure that we can exchange, and all of what you have seen will be put online, the Facebook Live as well. So let me conclude with a couple of remarks, but mostly to thank, well, first of all, the audience. I feel that we're still having over 70 people online, and this means that you were probably inspired by what you've seen, and not typing questions in, but really looking and absorbing all of the projects and journeys that you've seen. I want to heartily thank again INHAF, and notably Radhika and Kisha, who have been impeccable logistic support and assistance in organizing this. Kirti, our masterman behind the scene, and Esther, who may have disconnected because it must be over midnight in Australia. But Kirti as well, thank you so much for making this happen and offering the opportunity to us as a network to be part of the INHAF initiative. And our panelists, I mean, I cannot thank you enough, and I would put it maybe in some of the keywords around what mobilizes you. I've seen it is brilliance, it is bravery, it is joy, it is your stubbornness probably as well, and it is telling your stories, which are so different from mainstream stories that we hear and are so much worth telling, which I think have been the main inspiration today. I would like to just maybe conclude with a quote of a person who I personally admire in writing, because she is Indian. She's an architect, writer, and activist, and she's called Arundhati Roy. And I read it, maybe even one of the seminars had quoted her, but she just says that historically pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next one. So coming from an architect, writer, activist that combines many skills and within probably a part of the Indian network. I would like to again thank you so much. And if Radik and Ankisha are there, thank you again for making this happen with your technical and logistic support.
Thank you, Sandra. Give me a minute to thank every one of you. Sandra, thank you very much for putting together such an incredibly inspiring webinar. And I think it's humanitarian architecture, is disasters, is women, is children, and inspiring journeys. Absolutely stunning. So thank you very much for taking out time and doing this for us. Also, I must thank personally Saija, Forhat, Chiara, Ella, Michèle, and Ramona for that remarkable presentation. We're very grateful to all of you. It's wonderful to know you. Wonderful to know that such wonderful work is happening across the world. Very delighted that you came and shared all that you have with us. Thank you very much, Sandra, once again to you. And of course, Professor Ellsworth, who may not be there. It's too late there, but thank you, everyone. Thank you. This is a different kind of webinar. This is a 45th, but 56th. But we learned a lot. And I'm very glad we did this, and very glad, Sandra, that you made it possible with the selection of people that you brought in. Thank you.
Thank you again. Have a lovely rest of the day.
I must thank my colleagues for putting this together, helping everyone, seeing that it happened absolutely blemishless and without any problem. More than 2 hours. Thank you very much, everyone. Ankisha, Alika, Shimol, and everyone.